Welcome to Spreadsheet Geek. Today we're going to talk about one of the most commonly used Excel functions, VLOOKUP. This video was made using Microsoft Excel 2019. What is a VLOOKUP and what does it do? Well, imagine you're reading a book and you come to a word you don't recognize. You go over to your dictionary, you page through until you find that word, and you read the definition. This is essentially what a VLOOKUP function does in Excel. Your word that you're going to look up can be a word, but it can also be a number or a date or any number of contents you can put into a cell. The return doesn't necessarily have to be a definition. It can be a single word, a date, and so on and so forth, just as many different types of returns. Let's look at a VLOOKUP example. The first thing you're going to need when you run a VLOOKUP is a table of data, sometimes referred to as a data array. This one has column headers. That is actually not required, but most tables of data do have column headers. Under each column header, we have data in a vertical orientation, hence the name VLOOKUP. There is another function in Excel called HLOOKUP for horizontal lookup, and in a horizontal lookup, Excel will read to the right until it finds what it's looking for, and then it will go down a specified number of rows. That one is not used as often as VLOOKUP because when we lay out data, we tend to do it like this in a vertical orientation. So VLOOKUPs are going to go down a column until they find what they're looking for, and then they're going to go to the right a specified number of columns and return a value that's in that cell. One of the requirements for a VLOOKUP is that you look up a value in the left of your table somewhere and read to the right. So your return column must be to the right of the lookup column. Now, this is true in all versions of Excel if you're using VLOOKUP. I would point out, however, that in Office 365 there is a new function called XLOOKUP in which you can do a left-oriented lookup. Let's run a VLOOKUP using this list of employees. I've got my smaller list of employees here. I'm only interested in these particular employees, and I want to know their hire date. That hire date is in the far right column of my data array, and the last name is over here in column D. So let's type in a VLOOKUP formula. Like all formulas, it starts with an equals sign, and then you're going to type in V. And Excel is going to present to you all the functions that begin with a V. I can see VLOOKUP here. I'm going to go ahead and type an L to narrow it down to one thing. And a little tip here, you can hit the Tab key to get started. So I've got equals VLOOKUP, open parentheses, and I need to state what my lookup value is. That's going to be the last name in cell A2. I'm going to separate these factors in my formula definition with commas. So I'll put in a comma. The next thing Excel is asking for is where my table array is. So let's go there. I'm going to define a table that's actually smaller than this, what you see on the screen here. I'm going to start with the last name and scroll over to the hire date. Notice the little box. That's a great tip to remember what column you're in. So we're in the 11th column. We're going to have to tell Excel that in the next step. Note that that is not the 11th column of this worksheet, which I believe would be K or L. It's the 11th column of the table array that I have defined that runs between D and N. Note also that this data array is in the same workbook on a different worksheet, but it could be in a separate workbook. It could be in a separate workbook in the cloud. It doesn't really matter where it is as long as you have it open when you define your VLOOKUP function. So let's continue on. I'm going to go back to my formula here and put in another comma. And the next thing it's asking for is the column index number. And we said that was 11. And we'll put in a comma. And now it's asking for whether I'm willing to accept approximate matches. If I am, I would say true. If I'm not and I want an exact match, I'm going to type in false. Let's type in false in this case. We'll talk about approximate matches in a little bit. I'm going to close my formula because that was the last thing, but there is one more thing I need to do. When you start pasting this VLOOKUP formula into the cells below, you need to fix by making this an absolute reference and hitting the F4 key, your beginning and ending points for your data array. So when I paste this formula down or autofill it like I'm about to, the next one down is still looking at D2 to N15, and this one is 2. Now we've got some errors we're going to talk about. I put those in there on purpose. But if I didn't put these dollar signs in here and I pasted this down, my operation would shift down one row every time I look up a new value. So we don't want that. Let's look at these errors. There's 3 or 4 pretty common errors that can frustrate people on VLOOKUP tables, and there's a few of them here. How about Kim? He's returning not applicable, which is an error, and I think I see the problem. There is no Kim. So if you have names in your list, obviously they're not going to return anything. How about O'Leary? I think I saw O'Leary. O'Leary's here. Okay, that looks like a punctuation difference. So remember, we specified an exact match. So let's take out that apostrophe, and now it's working. How about Skilling? I thought I saw Robert Skilling on here. That looks like a match, but go up here and check. Oh, see that space at the end? Let's take that out, hit enter, and now it's working. So I had a space at the end of this name that was not in my table array. That can cause problems. And Weber. Weber does not have a space. Where's Weber? Here's the space here. So that can work both ways. Let's take out that space and see if it fixed her name. Yes, it did. So I've got everybody I needed except Kim, who isn't there. So I'm going to have to research that separately. While we've got this open, I'm going to go ahead and undo those last 3 error corrections. Let's take a look at whether approximate match would have detected that problem and fixed it for us. So I'm going to go into this one next to O'Leary. Remember, we've got the apostrophe on this O'Leary and no apostrophe here. So if I changed my formula to say true, will that fix it? He's returning May 8th, 2019, and that is correct. So that would have fixed that one. What about Skilling? He had a space after his name. and the one in the table array does not. Skilling, that looks right, but the date is actually wrong. For some reason, it's returning Marianne's hire date, not his. So this is why, and let's look at Weber. This is why this isn't used very often. You get some wacky results. So Weber, it looks like it found a date, but is Weber's date? I'm curious because that's showing up multiple times. Weber's date is actually February 18th, 2017. So again, it appears to work, but it's returning the wrong value. I would think twice before you select true on approximate match, but there are some situations in which it works pretty well. Let's try one more thing. Let's go to one that worked, and Tate looks like she's working. Tate up here, January 15th, 2016. So that's the correct answer. Does capitalization matter? Let's go to our table array and spell her name without a capital letter. Tate, it still works. So capitalization is not a requirement if you put false in there. It's close enough to work. There's another example I want to show. And what's happened here is that we have the same employee data list with the hire dates over here, but somebody has added John Doe a second time. They didn't know he was on there already. And John Doe's data is all the same except for his email address. He's got a different email. So we have a conflict there. So if we ask for John Doe's email address, which one of these is it going to choose? Let's go through the steps. Equals VL tab. I'm going to look up this value, comma, in this table. This time I'm going to come over to the 10th column, comma, 10, comma, false. And I'm going to remember to fix my table array by making those absolute. And just look for that every time you enter a VLOOKUP statement. Sometimes it's already there by default, depending on what version of Excel you're using. So there's my first email address, and what do we get for John Doe? We get the jdoe@email.com, and that was the first one. So that is a good thing to remember. If you have two identical lookup values, it's going to return the first one. It always starts at the top and works down toward the bottom. I'm going to show one more thing about VLOOKUP formulas, and that is the way that you can embed them. So this is a VLOOKUP table. I've already plugged in the functions. It's returning the hire dates for all these people. But let's say instead of hire date, I wanted to know years in service with the company. So you may not be aware of this, but you can actually type in a today with a set of parens there, and you can get today's date, and that is correct. So dates, if you reformat them, become numbers. The number 1 formatted as a date is January 1st, 1900, and then January 2nd was the 2, and so on and so forth. So today is the 44,005th day since day 1. So how can we do this? We can take our VLOOKUP formula and embed it. I can say today's date minus that VLOOKUP date would be the number of days that employee had in service. So let's put in today minus the formula. And I'm going to format this not as a date, but as a general format. This employee has worked for 1,032 days. And if I take that whole operation, put it in the numerator, and divide by 365, I get, I'll just take that to one decimal place, 2.8 years. If I then go up here and autofill it, I have years in service for all of these employees using an embedded VLOOKUP formula. If you've enjoyed the content of this video, please hit my subscribe button. And if you want to be reminded when I post future content, please hit the little bell with a mouse click next to the subscribe button. Thanks for visiting Spreadsheet Geek.